Welcome to 12 Faces Sober Speaks Podcast, episode 40. Lucky number 40 for my favorite rapper, although he does drink, but we just want to say that anyway. But yes, today's guest is Chelsea. She has a podcast. It's called the StiickyEddie Podcast. And let me tell you, it caught my attention just by the name itself. So I can't wait for her to give some background on the podcast, background on herself, and some of the things that she's trying to do moving forward in this sober journey. And before we go into the interview, I just want to give you guys some updates. 12facessober.com. You can't get this hoodie because this stuff now is discontinued, but you can get the camo. You can get the camo 12 Faces of Sober. I got hoodies, t-shirts, tights, workout tights for women, workout shorts for women, tank tops, a variety of different things, different colors, different sizes. So I don't discriminate. So I know when I had these ones, it was only limited to 2XL. But like I said, I believe the sizes go up to 5X. So take advantage of that. You could also get my book on 12 Faces of Sober. All you got to do is click on sign copy. You'll get a nice personalized message from yours truly. And as well, you can get, you can also sign up for updates. I'm going to be doing a little bit more information here in the future, letting you guys know I am working with a publishing company to get my children's book out there about my baseball career. Well, my young adolescent year of baseball in San Diego. And with baseball coming back, this is a good time to get a book about, another book about baseball. And as well as I'm still working on the Army book. I'm not gonna lie, it is difficult just for the simple fact that I have to go back into, you know, a part of my life where I was really and truly trying to forget. And I wanna make sure that I'm giving you information and details more than what I did in 12 Faces of Sober, the book itself. You could also get my book on Amazon. All you gotta do is type in 12 Faces of Sober. The book went #1 in 2 different categories on February 22nd, and it stood at #1 for at least 48 hours. And that was in alcoholism and #1 in short reads. So I appreciate those who did download the book that around that time. And for those who need to get the book, like I said, I provided all the resources and tools for you to get it because I appreciate the support. It's a good short read, but it brings you into my world because I am somewhat of a shy person, but I had to put it on paper because I felt like people needed to know that, you know, this veteran did make it out of some tough times. But enough of me talking. Like I said, my guest is Chelsea. I've been following her now roughly, I would say 2 months, give or take. And she has a good message. And when I first saw the name, I was like, okay, I'm gonna add her. That it doesn't matter what kind of content. And then I was surprised, you know, to get once I got the definition of you know where the StiickyEddie came from. And so here she is today, gonna, you know, fill you in on that and also some gems and tools to help you out later on in the future. So Chelsea, welcome to 12 Faces Sober Speaks Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Oh my gosh, what an honor and what a lovely introduction. Thank you so much. That was so kind. So the StiickyEddie podcast actually has 2 eyes in the word sticky. Those 2 eyes represent drumsticks, if you will. My dad was a drummer in life, and he used the name Sticky professionally as like a little pun, again, to represent the drumsticks. And he was the alcoholic in my life. He passed away. I found out that he was gone on December 23rd, 2020. He had unfortunately suffered an upper GI bleed due to cirrhosis of the liver and passed away. So since then, I've kind of been in a tailspin. My dad was my soulmate, my best friend, the other half of my coin, and life without him has definitely been rough and extremely difficult to navigate. And so in trying to process and trying to move forward with my grief, I started the StiickyEddie podcast to amass other stories, other sources of inspiration, people such as yourself who have suffered in active addiction, and also loved ones of people who have suffered with active addiction or sadly are no longer here. And it's a small following that I have on Instagram thus far, but I've been at the podcast for just about a year now, and the journey has been extraordinary. And out of my sadness, I've been able to meet amazing people such as yourself. So I'm lucky to be guided by my dad's spirit in that way.
Wow, that's amazing. So now you mentioned about your father, and he he was an alcoholic. Now, was this something that you witnessed growing up as a child? Like you saw this? Because I know that, like, some parents, some parents of a household of color, usually, it kind of like something just popped into my mind, like that Friday and Saturday night, if your parents back in the 80s would have a get together, they would send you off into the other room while they did their thing. So was this something that you witnessed yourself growing up? I know you said your dad was a drummer.
Yeah.
So you might not have saw everything, but what did you see growing up?
Yeah, so it's interesting. And I would also like to point out, my family is multiracial. My mother is from Puerto Rico, and my dad is a whole mix of European things. But yeah, it was just myself and my parents growing up. I'm an only child, and the three of us as a young family were very close. So I was always around my parents. When we had company, we hosted as a family, and I wasn't ever really put into a different area, because I actually was well behaved as a kid. So it wasn't like I wasn't mature enough to be around. But some of my earliest memories are of seeing like the little wine jugs of Carlo Rossi in like the bottom left. That's bringing it back, right? The bottom of the pantry. When I was a really young child, every Friday night was pizza night. So we lived in a neighborhood where like pretty much everything was in walking distance. And my dad and I would walk down to the pizza place, and we'd be sitting at the counter waiting for the pizza to be ready. And my dad would like have a scotch at the bar, and I would have like a Shirley Temple. Then on the way home, we'd stop at the liquor store and he'd get whatever he was getting. And I would be so excited because I'd get those little strawberry candies that are actually wrapped up to like look like little strawberries. I'm dating myself. So I was aware of its presence as a very young child, but my dad was not physically abusive. He would just get drunk to the point where he was belligerent, like it changed his personality. He would just become really silly, really obnoxious, kind of sloppy. I think he thought he was being more charming than he really was. And it would create a lot of tension between my parents. So the tension between them is always what I caught on to first. And then as I got older, I started realizing, oh, dad's drinking is what's really like exacerbating these fights and this tension and all of these things. And yeah, my dad had band practice. We eventually moved into a house, and my dad used to have band practice in the basement. So, like I would always see like bottles of beer and other things laying around our basement. So I was always aware of it. I just didn't understand until maybe I was a teenager that this poison was literally just that. Like it was starting to seep into everything. It was changing my dad's personality. It was detrimental to my parents' marriage. It was causing some of the worst verbal arguments I wouldn't wish the type of arguments that my parents had, just verbal, but still they were so toxic. I wouldn't wish that on any child, So I think it's hard to fathom when you're a small kid, but it's definitely there. And I definitely felt it.
Now, during that process, did you experiment with it, with drinking? I mean, it was around you, but like I said, there are some like myself who indulged. But I mean, how about you? What exactly did you, or were you like, nah, let me, just watch, but not try to, experiment?
Yeah. So actually, it's so weird. When I was a small kid, and I say small, like let's say 8, 9, 10, I think I had sipped like my mom's wine or somebody's beer once, and the taste was so wretched to me. Like I just, ugh, I was immediately so horrified and so turned off. I was like, this is gross. I'm never drinking. I also said I would never drink coffee. And here I am, like 6 cups a day for most of my life. But alcohol, I didn't really start actually liking it and really like saying like, hey, this kind of makes you feel a certain way. I was probably 14, 15 when I really started like dipping into what was in the cabinet when no one was home and saying like, hey, like this is kind of good. So it took a little bit. It was a process.
Mm. And during that time, there are some who start off at that age and find themselves getting into trouble. Did you experience any of that?
Thankfully, no. For the majority of my life, if you asked me, I would always say, I don't suffer with addiction this way. My dad was definitely the addict in my life. Even, like I was a very, I guess what you would say traditionally social drinker. As I got older, I would drink in a social setting with my friends and, definitely went to parties and things like that. But in my day-to-day life, it was never something that I needed, that I depended on. It did not, I didn't think about it. It was very out of sight, out of mind. As my dad's disease got worse, especially let's say around 2015, 2015 and 2017, when my son was very, very small. My dad had an incident where he was on, I guess, some sort of bender. My parents had been divorced for about 6 or 7 years by then. And my dad had been drinking heavily for a few months, and he was at an age where it just really started catching up with him. He started hallucinating, and he actually was suffering a small stroke. And he started hallucinating and he got very physically ill. Again, my parents were divorced, but once they finally separated, they actually became very good friends and they lived in close proximity to each other. So my dad actually called my mom and was like, I need help. I have to get to the hospital. I can't, I'm really ill. So she took him to the hospital. And by the time he got there, we were really scared that that was going to be it. He suffered the stroke. He couldn't speak. He could barely move. He couldn't keep anything in his body. It was horrific. He really was very out of it, incoherent, didn't know like who was who, where he was. It was horrific. Thankfully, he made it out of that. He was able to recover his speech. He was able to physically recover almost to full capacity. But it was terrifying. And it was things like that that happened over my lifetime that just made me really put myself at a distance from alcohol. I would say that I smoked more weed than I drank because it just after a while made me feel very sick and very tired. And I was just really starting to see like, oh, this is just straight poison, like this isn't anything good. So yeah, watching him suffer, I would say put me off for a really long time.
And did you or your mother at any point like have a conversation with him in regards to the drinking? And if so, how was it received by him?
So here's the thing. This started when I was maybe 8 years old. It was our first Christmas Eve in the house that I grew up in. We had just moved into this house. I don't remember how the fight started, but they started fighting, and I imagine that it had something to do with his drinking. It got so bad that I remember sobbing on the kitchen floor with my arms up, like dividing my parents from each other, and just hysterically crying, like, please just get divorced. I cannot do this anymore. Please get divorced. I can't handle it. And thereafter, my mom and I would have a lot of conversations with my dad. Like, we love you so much. We just don't like what you're doing to yourself. It makes you a whole different person. And he would be very defensive. He would be, he would shut down. Sometimes he would cry. Sometimes he would get emotional, because you have to understand, and I talk about this on my show a lot, there's such a duality between the sober person as they are and the personality that their addiction gives them. And so when my dad was sober, he was this massively talented, musician. He drew people to him. He listened to you. When you spoke, it was like you were the only person that existed in the world. He had endless patience. He was just a good human, like one of the best. And whatever was inside of him, whatever childhood trauma he had suffered, or whatever depressive aspect was making him say, like, I have to numb this somehow. He couldn't escape from that. He couldn't, disengage from what was ailing him and find a healthier way to cope. So there were long periods where whatever words my mom and I would say to him would work. There was a point in time when I was a teenager when he was sober for like 4 years. And then that ended with him getting a DUI. He went to a gig one night, and it was like 5:00 in the morning, and he still wasn't home. And my mom and I were super panicked, and we ended up getting a call from the Department of Environmental Protection. We call them the DEP police here in New York.
Wow.
I didn't even know that they could technically arrest you, but apparently they can if you are a danger to society. But my dad was doing like 75 down like a country back road, and he was inebriated. And this DEP guy was pulling out of a nearby park and saw him and arrested him. And it was a really sad time, because I think I was about 20 by this point, and I'm watching my hero, come out of a park ranger station, essentially. And like, now he's facing DUI charges. And it was just insane to me. Like, why wouldn't you want to change this behavior? But now what I know in doing this podcast for a year and being, a year and a couple of months out from losing him is his, we weren't responsible for his disease, obviously, as his loved ones, but we were shaming him. And that never works. And, you and I have talked about it too, but you're not going to stop doing something unless you are ready to fully commit to stopping. So honestly, what we should have done at the time is done a little bit more research and gotten a little bit more involved and really started to learn perhaps about harm reduction, and maybe approached him that way to say, like, look, we love you. We support you. If you can't stop, you can't stop, but we need you to be healthy because we want you to stick around. So what can we do to help you make steps toward lessening the amount that you drink, or coping with this a little bit differently, so that you're here in like 5, 10, 15 years.
And do you think that they're like, I mean, as a child, like I said, my father, I'll be honest, I don't know if he drinks. I know that when I'm around him, he doesn't drink, but I've heard other stories that he still drinks. But I just know that when I'm around him, I have to be honest and say it like that. But do you think that as children, should we intervene in a situation like that? Like, okay, this is the parent, and will the parent actually receive the message that we're trying to, like, if we have concerns, because I'm gonna tell you, like, I knew my dad had a drinking problem, but I knew that I wasn't gonna sit here and be like, hey, you need to get your shit together. Like, it was just one of those things where it's like, you know, at least in our household, it was like, all right, well, hey, I knew uncles drunks, aunts drunks, cousins drunks, but it was just like, oh, that's just Uncle so-and-so, oh, they're drunk, Auntie so-and-so, she's drunk, all right, whatever. So it was never one of those things where it was actually addressed. And that to me is like, I guess, I don't know if it's because of the authority figure and the respect, whereas like, you don't be like, hey, look, mom, hey, dad, you got a problem, you need help. And will they actually receive that? You know what I'm saying? Because they'd be like, you're the child, I should be telling you what to do rather than you telling me what to do. So how
Yeah.
was that? Like, you know, how was that for you?
So this struggle with alcoholism is very genetic in my family. This problem goes back at least 6 or 7 generations. And my grandmother, my father's mother, had also essentially drank herself to death. You
Mm,
know, so this was not a far-fetched thing or something that was unheard of in the family. And I think that element of it added to it being more easily addressed,
mm,
for lack of better terminology. But also, again, the way that I was raised, you know, my mom was a little bit older when she had me. She was 41. Um, it was just the three of us. We were a very tight-knit little group. And my dynamic with my parents was always different from the moment I was born. You know, my dad felt like you don't talk to a child like they're a child. You know, he always spoke to me like I could handle it, like I was his peer,
mm,
not in an inappropriate manner, but you know, like he never did like the little baby talk to me, and he never condescended me, he never spoke down to me. He always empowered me to like use my voice, and treat everybody like an equal.
mm,
um Whereas if this had been my mother's family, in Puerto Rico, I don't think that it would have landed the same way, to
mm,
be honest with you. So for me, it was easier to address this problem with my dad because of the nature of our relationship. I don't think that everybody has that advantage. And you know, you and I both know, again, there is a cultural difference, for whatever reason. And I love trying to you know, to what's the word, like untangle this mystery, but it's so omnipresent, right? Like you said, for Black and brown people, you know, there's this cultural way where, you know, you have a barbecue, everybody's drinking, somebody falls out of their chair, it's just funny, it's
mm,
normalized, it's not sensationalized, it's not addressed, it's just like a way of things. um and we don't talk about that enough, and
mm,
it's extremely frustrating, um because no one should feel shamed, and
mm,
you should feel like you can say to your parent or your loved one from a place of respect, but also from a place of deep love and pain, like, hey, I know that you're my dad. Like, I have to essentially do what you say. But at the same time, I'm your child. You're supposed to protect me and my feelings, and you're hurting me,
mm.
you know? So we have to figure this out together, because I respect you and I want you around. And as your child, you should want me to feel safe and like everything will be okay. Um, and so I think it's very dependent on your dynamic with this person and how you feel they can be approached.
Mm. Yeah, and two things came to mind. Unfortunately, my when I got married the first time,
Just too
someone in her
tough.
family, they, as soon as you said the passing out, like the reception had just started, and
Oh my God.
there was somebody in her family passed out, but see, they saw it as a joke, but
Yeah.
that person had serious issues with drinking, and it didn't matter what event, family event that they held, he was the person that would more or less was like the party starter, but then it was like, okay, after a little while, the party started turning into fights. You know what
Oh
I'm
my
saying?
God.
And you know, and it's tough though. It really is, because it makes it worse, like you said, in the Black and brown community, especially. And I'm glad you touched on that. Is because, you know, it's everywhere. You know, music, alcohol.
Yeah.
You know, you turn on a sporting event, alcohol. It doesn't matter if it's football, if it's soccer, if it's baseball, boxing. Somehow, some way, it's getting together. Like you said, when like these UFC fights, there was a UFC fight with last weekend or the weekend before.
Sure.
There various Buffalo Wild, well, I shouldn't say no restaurants, various sports bars. Obviously, the majority of the people that were there were probably, you know, interacting as far as drinking, especially if it's a long undercard where you got 5 or 6 fights. You know, just use your imagination. That's 4 hours of just nonstop fights, or when I say like 3 hours. And so, and you know, and you got social media, and you have these individuals who have their own alcohol, or they're promoting their own alcohol. And then of course, as a supporter of that particular artist, you're like, okay, I want to try it. You know, it's the same way, like you mentioned Carlos Rossi. You know, my one of my favorite rappers is E40, and I remember he had a song called Carlos Rossi, and I remember you know, I think it was 97 or 98, I got drunk drinking Carlos Rossi, and let me tell you,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I have not had Carlos Rossi since.
Well, I don't blame you.
Yes.
Oh, it just put like a taste in my mouth.
Yeah. So as soon as you said that, I was like, ooh, yeah, 97, 98. And went to the beach drunk with that. I never forget that. So yeah, so it's one of those things where it's, you know, they don't understand how much of an influence they have on the Black and brown community when it comes to alcohol, and saying, okay, I got drunk off this, or, you know, as an example, Casamigos. You got all these TikTok videos. It's like, this is what Casamigos will do to you. And, you know, and I'm like, okay, but do you understand that, are you going to be still doing this in 5 and 10 years? You know, and
So you and I, you were in the music industry. You remember like in the early aughts, like the big thing with Cristal and like Damon Dash with his bottles and all of that. Like, you know, it's marketed past the Cavassier.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
dope song, but
just like you said, that was the first time I had those, and the last time was when I was in radio drinking Cristal, and, you know, in VIP, and I'm just like, I took I never forget, I took my buddies to the club, and I was like, hey, you know, I'm just letting you know it's gonna be VIP treatment. You know, you guys don't have to pay for nothing unless you go downstairs to the main floor. And sure enough, it was bottles on bottles, and I didn't pay for it. It was somebody else's booth, and we was drinking it, but she didn't care because she had the money like that. And but it's there, and you're right. Like I said, even in the early 2000s, everybody was trying to have some type of drink, and you know, some were successful and are still out, and some aren't. But like I said, and even now, it's like everybody has their hands in that, you know, industry, because it's a money, it's a cash grab. They know that, okay, if I'm a celebrity and I'm saying this is the greatest thing to drink, people are gonna go buy it until they figure out, like, okay, maybe I don't like. Because even like, you know, I give you an example, and it's nothing against E40. You know, when E40 started making his drinks, the different wines or whatever, I was the first one. I was like, I have to try this. You know, because like I said, you know, I think it was maybe like my last year in the Army. So this is like 2014. And, you know, he had the Earl Stevens selection or whatever. And I was like, man, you know, it's about time. You know, he's been rapping about everybody else's stuff, and now he came out. So it was like, but only certain places had it. Where I had to go, I had to go to Phoenix to get it. And then, you know, E40 came out with malt liquor. And at that time, that's what I used to like to drink. So it was like, all right, I could pay a little bit extra, get this E40 beer, or I can still go get the cheap stuff. But I'm like, I want to support E40. So that's what I would do. I would go drive to the only liquor store I knew that sold it on the
Wow.
side of Phoenix to get it. You know what I'm saying? But that's just the dedication and support for one artist. But I'm not the only one
No.
that's doing that, you know, or did it. I ain't doing it now. But you know, so it's definitely difficult. And because I remember like watching the Super Bowl, for another example of just like how many commercials were for alcohol, but then they didn't
Yeah.
have those commercials like they used to, where it's like, you know, get stopped, get a DUI. Like I don't even recall seeing not a single one of those
Wow,
commercials.
you're right. You're so right. Wow, I didn't think of that.
Yeah. And they
Wow.
used to have,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna say every Super Bowl, but it was like something that was like, okay, we know you guys are drinking, but you also
Yeah.
know that you get in your car after this game, we're gonna be, you know, we're coming.
Yeah, it was drive sober or get pulled over, stuff like that, you
Yes,
know.
yes.
All of those things, they were very dramatic, like the cop comes out of the shadows and he's like, I know you're not, you know. You're right though, but what's funny is as you're talking about E40, like the timbre and cadence of your voice, you kind of sound like him. That's so funny. I haven't thought about E40 in a long time, but now
that's
I'm
that's
listening to you speak and I'm like,
that's
wow, you kind of.
that's my dude. Yeah, I used to do work with his sister, Sugar T, when I was I think it was like my first,
Wow.
my maybe like my second or third semester in grad school. I just reached
Wow.
out to her, was like, I want to work with you. I was like, I don't care. And I did a few things with her and then, you know, just moved on. But it was just to get the
That's
experience
cool.
was
Yeah.
real dope. Yeah, I'm still looking. I'm still trying to see if I can meet him. I didn't reach out to his cousin Be Legit, and I'm just trying to get him. But I know that, you
Don't
know,
give up. Don't give
oh
up.
yeah, no doubt, no doubt. You know, like I said, I still got connections in the Bay Area. It's just a matter of I'm stuck out here in Florida. So if I was out there, it would be a different ball game in terms of network.
That's, you know, after this, I'm gonna have to go on Spotify and listen to some throwbacks now. You're like putting that vibe in my head.
Okay.
But it's so true also too, because you know, especially like my dad being a drummer, he was always in restaurants and bars. You know, he was a blues, jazz, and swing drummer.
Mm.
You know, so these were pretty big shows and weddings and things like that. There was always alcohol present. Um, and it's funny because it's not funny, but we're speaking about cultural inferences and influences. And you know, from the time I was a little kid, the first two artists I strongly remember hearing were Little Richard and Muddy Waters.
Mm.
Those are my first musical memories, especially Little Richard, because even though, you know, I was way too little to understand like the lyrical content, the upbeat and the music of it just was like a part of my soul from a really young age. And then as I started getting older and more educated about music and these artists, it always struck me as super sad how present drugs and alcohol were from the very beginning. We're talking like Son House at the turn of the century. You know, for those of you who might not be familiar, and I hope that you are, but Son House is like almost the creator of blues as we know it today. Like if there were no Son House, there would be no Robert Johnson, there would be no Muddy Waters, there would be no James Brown, there would be no Bruno Mars, there would be none of this. But you know, these are people who were of very limited means. There were not a lot of options. There was a lot of moonshine. There was a lot of rye. There were a lot of homegrown things going on. There was a lot of, obviously, you know, as we know, discrimination and the horrible oppression against Black people in this country. It just led to a lot of depression and a lot of mental health issues that we know now. These people were numbing their pain with drugs and alcohol because there was no other hope for them. No one was going to support them with therapy or any other means of kindness. And it carries forward today. Like even in, you know, on my mother's side of the family, there are a lot of, you know, mental health issues and things that we just don't address, we just don't speak about. And it's really sad. Even as a small child, I remember my parents tried therapy a couple of times together and separately. And they gave up so quickly. Like neither one of them really stuck with it. And it was just always something to me where it felt like, okay, well, if your problems aren't solved in like the first 3 or 4 sessions, then we're done with this and we just move on. So it's taken me a very long time. I'm in therapy now for almost a year. This is the longest I've ever sat with anyone and told them. And the things that come out of me that I, have repressed are remarkable. So, it's very far reaching, especially in a lot of, diverse communities. And it makes me sad, to be honest, that it's not more at the forefront and more normalized to support each other. If you're falling out of your chair at a wedding ceremony, like, please someone help that person. Just
yeah. Pretty very much so. Yeah. And then was the life of the party for the rest of the night. That's the part.
I'm sure.
And and since you mentioned therapy,
Yeah.
you've been in therapy for a year. Now, I myself have been in therapy. I would say, well, I was forced initially in the Army, but I wish I would have. I really wish, truly wish that I would have, dealt with some of the trauma that I went through as a child growing up, witnessing, my father abuse, alcohol, the conflicts that arose from my dad's drinking, and how, sometimes my dad would try to challenge me. And, I want to stress that. I definitely want to stress that, and of course, everybody doesn't have the means, to go get the therapy. But if you do have it and you feel like something isn't right in your life, regardless of if it's the addiction to alcohol or the drugs or the anything else, abuse, witnessing, growing up, whatever it is, definitely go, because it has been the best thing. And I'm so sad that, like, I might be losing my therapist because of the simple fact of me moving to Georgia. And because she can only do my therapy sessions here in Florida. So it's key. And so I would ask you, is that how has it truly helped you? A lot of times, and like you said, it comes from a family thing where sometimes we don't know how to express our feelings, and to be able to walk into a door to get the therapy. Sometimes even then you're fighting, because even when I was in the Army, I was just checking a box. It was like, okay, yeah, I got in trouble for drinking. Now I got to go see a therapist. But I didn't take advantage of it. I mean, I told him certain things, but I wish I would have told him everything, because then I would have been able to, be further along with my mental health, instead of like, okay, I didn't really take my mental health as serious until I got sober. And it could have changed a lot of different things if I would have had at least the therapist that I have today. And
I think it's one of those things, like you said earlier, you won't do it until you're ready. So it sounds like that applies to you. You maybe weren't quite 100% ready. Oh boy. My therapist is amazed at how honest I am with her. She has told me a couple of times that she's very surprised at the amount that I have shared with her. And I think it's because I have nothing left to lose. The worst thing has already, knock on all the wood. The worst thing has already happened to me. My best friend is gone. My dad grew up, I've mentioned this to you before, but my dad was raised in a suburb of New York City, and he grew up in the late 50s and early 60s, and he was going to Catholic school in the era where it was totally okay for nuns and priests to abuse you physically, emotionally, and sometimes worse. It just wasn't as exposed as it is today. So my dad actually suffered permanent hearing loss rather, sorry, from a priest who thought that he was misbehaving in mass. I think he was like 7 or 8 years old. And this priest came over to him and yelled at him so loud in his ear that my dad actually lost hearing.
Wow.
Partially. Things like that happened to him. I asked my dad a couple of times over, our time together, what happened to you? Like, what was your trauma that you suffered that this is your reason for drinking? And he could never say. He would just tell me, I just like the way it makes me feel. Like, I like the way my head feels when I'm like buzzed, and it just makes me like more loose and enthusiastic and all of that. But I feel like there was something more there. And so when I lost him, it took me a couple of months, and then I finally found someone to talk to, and I was like, you know what? I have to lay it all out, because the fact that I never found out truly what was going on in my dad's head and heart affected me greatly. I loved my dad fiercely, but he was not perfect. No human being is. So there were a lot of instances growing up where, I was a good kid. So I was trusted with a lot of freedom. And I guess you could say like I was kind of a latchkey kid. We lived in the suburbs. So I would come home to an empty house. My parents would still be at work. I'd let myself in and go about my life. And as I became a teenager, it became mischievous. And not in always healthy ways. And so a lot of these things that I didn't even realize were abuse by, boyfriends and peers and things that I wouldn't have categorized as being abusive then, but I see now were truly incredibly harmful. Those are the things that are coming out as I progress in my therapy journey. And I'm realizing like, oh my gosh, I have my own traumas on top of, the pain of losing my dad, that really need to be addressed, because a lot of times, especially in the very early days after losing him, I was getting very angry. I was biting everybody's head off. I was not, I just didn't know what to do. I felt like I was clawing out of my body, like I just was trapped. And it was because a lot of this trauma was coming to the surface and I just didn't know where to put it, and I didn't know why. So it's been helpful in making me be more cognizant of when I'm having a bad day or a bad moment, why I might be having that moment. And if I am rude to my son or my husband as a result, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's because of A, B, and C. And I am so sorry. I hope that you'll allow me the chance to do better. And that's been better from my relationships with my immediate family now. But I think the biggest thing is, I realized around New Year's of this year that, ironically enough, losing my dad to alcoholism was making me so depressed that I was starting to drink more and more. And I would have never considered it a problem, except it was like I couldn't stop thinking about it out of nowhere, and then it became almost like Pavlovian, like, oh, Friday night, it's the weekend, let's stop and get a bottle of wine or 3 on the way home and have it between Saturday and Sunday. Now, for anybody who knows, especially as a woman, like you're maybe supposed to have, I think it's like 5 or 6 ounces of wine like a day, and that's like a safe amount. But if you are an alcoholic, or anybody who knows what it is to be drunk, 5 ounces of wine, like what's that going to do?
That's a glass.
It's like, but it's nothing, you're not gonna. So I started liking the way I was feeling while I was getting buzzed and then subsequently drunk. And then it just became like, I'm too dependent on this feeling. Now I know what my dad was saying. And then, couple that with doing this podcast, I had like this moment where I was just like, whoa, this can't be. Also too, as a parent, I can't go to bed drunk and God forbid something happens in the middle of the night and I have to get up and like drive my child somewhere, So New Year's Eve, I took a nap till like 10:30 to prepare for the ball drop because I'm an old lady. And I woke up, I had like a glass of champagne and we toasted the new year. I went back to bed. And the next day I was like, you know what? I'm done. Like, enough. I can't get to a stage where this is ruling any part of my life because I will not be doing service to my father's memory. I won't be being honest on my own platform. And it's just not beneficial in any way. It just keeps me stuck. And I don't want to be stuck. Am I going to be completely sober for the rest of my life? I have no idea. But today, do I want to pick up a glass of wine? No. No. And it was hard at first. There were a couple of days where I was like, I can't believe like I'm not drinking right now. And like this, I've had this horrible day. But then I started thinking about that. Why do we need something to numb every horrible day or every horrible feeling?
Right.
Why are we so prone to numbing?
You don't want to, because for whatever reason, you want to forget, for that time, like, okay, hey, I had a bad day. Like, trust me, when I was in the Army, I had plenty of bad days. So it was like the moment I got off work, I was making a beeline to the closest liquor store.
Yeah.
When I lived on base. So it was like, all right, there's one right here. They sell this. Okay, on the base. If I want to drive a little bit closer to where I live, that they got the stuff I really like. Okay, but do I want to waste that time of driving a little bit further when I can get this and be home sooner and already start drinking? And forget about the whatever problems I may have been facing that particular moment. But then you wake up, the problems are still there. And I had to really, realize that, because like I said, I had a lot of different things that I dealt with, just, readjusting back to the real world or the civilian life after being basically a robot for 6 years, and was like, okay, dang, like, what am I going to do with my life now? Like, do I want to work? Do I want to go to school? No, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to drink and I'm going to think about what I just went through in the Army, because I was thinking that the Army was going to change my life, but then it just made my life just worse because the tolerance level of alcohol, increased with each year. But not only the Army, but it was the former married life I had. So, but yeah, and that's usually what it is that, we when we were drinking, we don't want to, or even the same way, like if you were going to a happy hour, you're not thinking about whatever issues and problems. If you got bills, car note, whatever it is, you're just caught up, you're stuck in that moment and not necessarily thinking about, okay, man, these problems are going to still be here when I leave this establishment, or when I go to bed and wake up the next morning. These problems are going to still be here. And I had to deal with it. I had to deal with, okay, look, I am a recovered alcoholic. I have anger issues, but at least I'm able to deal with my problems and issues, regardless of if I want to or not. I have to deal with them. And that's something that, and it's good, like I said, and I commend you. For one, I commend you because, like I said, all of what, you've been sharing, I salute you, because like, you took a different path in terms, to get to where you are. And that to me it doesn't really matter how you get to this point. It's just the idea of you getting to where you are today. You know what I'm saying? And at first I thought about it too. And I could say this openly. I was like, do I want to talk about your sobriety or really interview you? Because, it's still kind of, you're early in sobriety. And then, just from, the story that you're sharing with me today and before we talked, it's like, you didn't really have a problem, but you're doing it for other reasons. And that to me is what it's even stronger, because like I said, that wasn't like your stronghold. That wasn't like, like me, where it was like, look, 6 o'clock in the morning in Phoenix, I was at a store. 1:55, I was at a store, if I, you know what I'm saying, if I was able to drive, if not walk to the store, you know. And so I commend you, like, because like I said, you know, we all have the lanes and the goal of being sober. It's just you just took a different route. You know, you're doing this for the clarity of things that you couldn't, you know, you didn't understand from what your father was, you know, what he was going through, the problems that he may have faced and witnessed. Like you said, you shared about the Catholic school, and you know, the trauma and abuse that may go on even there. It's like that stuff he may have never been able to brief to you. You know what I mean? To let alone anybody else, your mom or any other family member, because it's like, who would understand? Some people, you know, some people may not even understand what he went through, especially during that, you know, the 50s and 60s. You know, you got people that's coming out 30, 40, you know, 30 years later saying that they, you know, went through certain things.
Yeah, it's so sad.
Yeah. So I definitely commend you. And the you know, one thing that came to mind is with the StiickyEddie Podcast is you know, it just, I mean, it's a kind of a cliche drummer term, but you know, the drum to the beat, and you're keeping the legacy of him going, and to get the opportunity to talk to other people, to get their, you know, their background, their story, and to see like, okay, mate, oh, come on, you can't do that. You can't do that. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
The opportunity to maybe get some closure, and the reason why I say closure is because the more stories you hear, maybe you're like, well, maybe this is what my dad was facing. You know, maybe this is what my dad was going through, but he just couldn't tell me, or he couldn't tell others.
Yeah.
So, you know, keep doing it, because this is what the sober community is all about, is being able to talk to the people who have a month, 2 months, 5, 10 years under their belt. But it's that experience, what got them to get sober, because there are a lot of people who didn't have that chance. So
I get emotional, Kenneth, and I thank you so much for saying those words. You know, it makes me, the reason why I start tearing up is because, oh, I know my dad would have loved to talk to people like you. You know, there's nobody that I've dealt with in this community thus far that I don't, you know, that my dad wouldn't love. And I hope that wherever he is, he sees all of you and is experiencing this right along with me. Because I think he felt really alone in the end. And that's, you know, that's my message for this community at large. You are not alone. You're not. Never. As long as I'm around, you're not alone. As long as Kenny's around, you are not alone. You always have someone to reach out to. Please do. Yeah. Please do.
Is definitely key, because I'll tell you.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. You know,
I mean it. I mean it 100%.
Yeah, I mean, this is the second time someone had teared up on here, but it's real. You know what I'm saying? Like, and to tell you, to say this, your dad is watching. You know what I'm saying? He more than likely, you know, I ain't gonna say more likely, he is watching because of the fact that you're still going. You know, you, as you stated, you started the podcast, you still was drinking, right? And then you got to a point where it was like, all right, you know, maybe this isn't what I want to do. But you know, you did not commit to yourself saying that you will never drink again, but you're willing to make changes. A lot of times people that struggle in this community are tougher than nails, and they're like, I'm not changing. I'm not doing this. Like, you say I got a problem, oh well, I'm going to continue to do it, and to take a break is better than just saying, okay, I'm going to continue to abuse myself, get in trouble, but I'm going to have a podcast about drinking. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah, it's so dishonest. It just
right,
didn't feel
right.
good.
So yeah, so I mean, it's I commend you. Like I don't know, like I don't even want to ask no more questions because I'm like, man, but before we do close this, because I don't, I'm saying I don't want to say no more stuff that had you, emotional and everything. But now the navigating through social media, like how you have the year under your belt, a little over a year under your belt for your podcast. How is navigating through the sober community? How has that been for you? And the recommendations for others to get, if they're curious about it, or just more or less your experiences from it.
Oh my God, such a joy. I hate social media. Again, I'm such an old lady. I lived, my teenage years in a time before any of this existed. So I remember what it was like to leave your house.
Me too, you know what I'm saying?
And no one knew where you were till you came home. And that was a great life. But I joined Instagram with a little bit of trepidation, but I know, in the world that we live in, you have to have a social media presence in order to get your message out there. Instagram is my primary function. StiickyEddie has a website as well, but I'm mostly active on Instagram. And everyone in this community is so kind and generous and interwoven, and they welcome you with open arms. All you have to do is start a handle and start searching sober accounts. If you reach out to people, I guarantee you within a day, you will hear back. It's not hard to get people's attention in this community. And they are so eager. It's like this wonderful chain network of people. Everyone is eager to reach out their hand and help you. 12 Faces of Sober, the Mental Corner, Recovery Survey, the Sober Highway. There's so many platforms and podcasts and people out there. A is for Alcoholic is another good one. You and I both know Haley, the recovery baddie. Haley,
shout out to her.
Shout out to Haley. That is my girl. I really hope that we can hang out in person one day because her energy is amazing. But if you're listening or watching and you need a helping hand, reach out to Recovery Baddie. Tell her that I sent you if you want. But she's amazing and she's not shy. My sponsor on the podcast is Brainwashed Coffee. And reach out to Billy. He's so responsive and so willing to help in any way that he can. So again, everybody is just super kind. It's been nothing but positive. I'm still so new, like the StiickyEddie podcast has a very small following at this point. Hoping to change that in the next year, just, get the message out there as much as possible. But it's been a positive thing and I've been pleasantly surprised by that. And I hope that continues because I like it. I dig it.
That's what's up. Yeah. And then one last question before we close out. So what message would you give to those that are still struggling, that are afraid to still struggling with alcohol, and are afraid to, one, go out there and potentially get therapy, or to try to, I guess, how do I question it? For those that may be out there that's still struggling with the addiction to alcohol, or may potentially need the help. You mentioned the social media and things like that, but what message would you give them just by, you navigating through and, having these guests on your show? What would you, some advice you would give to the next person who might be struggling?
So securing therapy, especially in the never-ending pandemic, is so hard. If at first you don't succeed, please keep trying. It's going to take a long time. So go into your search for a therapist knowing that it could take a lot of time to find a provider that your insurance or, your costs can cover, whatever your budget is. Don't give up. Um, Please reach out to me. I love research, and I literally spent most of my professional life as a professional assistant. So if you need assistance, I can always, lend a hand the best that I can. Um, but also don't be afraid to do a little bit of research and advocate for yourself. Finding someone that you trust to talk to, be it a therapist, a family member, a friend, a loved one, is really important because you do need to let it out. But also advocate for yourself. If you're sober curious and you're thinking that you want to make this change in your life, you're already most of the way there, because that's the biggest step, is knowing that you need the help and that you can't do it alone. So start doing some research on harm reduction techniques, because alcohol is the only substance that can actually kill you if you try to just suddenly detox from it. You cannot wake up one day as a severe alcoholic and say, I'm done. That's it. Your body will shut down. So know that. And if you don't believe me, Google it. My good friend JT Wahlberg is the author of a book called I Forgot to Stay Sober. He almost died because he decided that one day he would just stop drinking suddenly and all of his organs went into failure. Not a lot of people are aware of that, actually. I think a lot of people have a misconception that they can just stop cold turkey, and you physically can't. So please do some research and look into harm reduction techniques. Work with a social worker or your primary care physician and say to them, like, look, I drink whatever amount of liquor you drink a day. How can I slowly wean myself off to where even if I never stop, I'm maybe at a safer point for me where I can function. I'm not inebriated all the time and my life can kind of carry forward. But my biggest thing is, and this comes from, a fatherless daughter, and I would do anything to get in that DeLorean with Doc Brown and go back in time and change the outcome. Don't live your life ashamed. Don't be ashamed. This problem is much more common than you think. And if someone is leading with judgment, just say to them, like, look, I can't accept your judgment right now. Show me some compassion and I'll show you that I want this. I want to change, tell people, like, I need your compassion, not your judgment. And if you can't give that to me, then I have to go elsewhere. But you have to believe that you can do it, and you have to know that you're worth it. And you are worth it. Just, you are. Human life, you're worth it.
Wow. All right, now Chelsea, where can they follow you? Just again, I'm gonna put the information in the description, but you could just go ahead and say it. I might get technical and might throw it on the video this time or something. Ain't no telling, yeah. Let them know where they can follow you on IG.
Follow me on Instagram at _sticky_podcast. And please remember that there are 2 I's in sticky. You can email me at StiickyEddiePodcast@gmail.com. And you can also check out my website, StiickyEddie.com, StiickyEddie.
Make sure you guys reach out to her, like I said, and get on her podcast and tell your story. You never know. You might be surprised that your story might just be, something similar or a page out of Chelsea's book. You never know. In terms, you won't know until you get on there and share your story.
Absolutely.
Like I said, Chelsea, thanks again for coming on 12 Faces of Sober Speaks podcast. I truly have enjoyed the conversation. Good person, good energy. I'm definitely going to check in with you. Like I said, this is not just an interview and then forget about you type deal. Like I said, throughout this journey, You know, it's all about helping others, supporting others, and you definitely have a good soul. And I know for sure that I'm going to bug you and ask questions when I need to, because that's what it is.
Anytime.
You know, that's what it is in this community, is that, you know, getting around a good group or a circle of people that you know that you can count on. If you know, if you need to just, hey, one sentence or two, that could change the whole entire day, you know. And so that's pretty much what it is. But like I said, I do appreciate you coming on here. Like I said, you guys like, comment, subscribe, share, because these interviews are very informative, very helpful. You might shed a tear or two with the information provided. You know, I got to close it on a good note. But yeah, and that's what it's all about, is, you know, people getting on my show, speaking and telling their truth. Because like I said, I could do a show every day about my life, but it's going to get boring at some point. And so I want people to come on here and just wow them, you know, surprise them with whatever's going, you know, whatever happened in their lives. And there's some things I learned today about you that we didn't discuss the other day. So like I said, you saved some of the information, which is good. So again, thanks for tuning in, and stay tuned. There's going to be more episodes coming up. And like I said, thank you for all the support of 12 Faces of Sober. Without you, I'd be nothing. So like I said, keep watching the support. Thank you. This is 12 Faces of Sober. Take care.